everybody, and welcome back to OMB Reviews. I am the critic who is a cynic. Hope you're doing well, and today we're doing a box office breakdown for this past weekend, which saw extended releases of Bob Marley, One Love, and Madam Web, the new Sony Marvel venture. And let's just say, on the one hand, Bob Marley, One Love is definitely doing better than I think initial anticipation would have indicated, whereas Madam Web is doing about as bad as we thought. There are some indications that it might be coming in a little bit higher than early projections, but ultimately this film in the worldwide aggregate for total box office compared to the opening weekend worldwide for the film Morbius is looking to be about almost half of what Morbius made. And remember that Morbius was able to get to around $160 million or so worldwide by the end of its run. If this film continues to be half of what Morbius is, or even just slightly above half, right, 60% of what Morbius was able to do, you're still looking at a film that has a good chance of not reaching $100 million worldwide, which for any comic book movie is kind of just unknown. It's one of these things where never have we had, even the case there's been so many bad Sony Spider-Verse films, there's been so many bad Marvel films, right? And yet none of them, it seems, have ever been able to do what Madam Web is doing. The only saving grace that it has is that the budget for the film was only around $80 million, but that really doesn't help it at the end of the day when it's not making much money and it's still having a pretty sizable domestic international split, meaning, of course, that its return on investment is going to be a lot less. One thing that Tony over at Deadline is going to talk about, though, that does definitely, I think, spell a little bit of happier news for Sony, is the fact that they do have some different deals post-theatrical that will probably help to make up for whatever losses that they have on this movie. But let's just say you never want to have a movie where you're having to make money back after the fact and not having it just justify its own existence from the initial box office. So we'll talk about that amongst many other things. But before going any further, though, please make sure you smash that like button, light up that fire button on Aussie, and smash the rumble button as well. And also make sure that you are subscribed to the channel with that bell notification. That way you know every time a video or live stream goes live on the channel. Blessed first Sunday of Lent, by the way. I hope that your Lent is going swimmingly so far. And let's go ahead and get into the numbers. So as you can see, Bob Marley, One Love gets up and stands up. Oh, Tony. To $51 million, that is the domestic, whereas Madam Web crawls near $26 million. Now, going into the weekend, Tony had been covering this, saying the film was probably only going to get $20 million, if even that. And then as the numbers started to come out, it creeped up to $24 million as a possibility, but he also had his doubts. And then finally, it has come out, and they are reporting at the very least that it has made $26 million, but that is also over a 6-day frame. And so that is, of course, a piece of important context here, especially when anyone makes comparisons between this and Morbius. The fact that Morbius, in its initial opening weekend, which was more of a traditional opening, was able to make almost twice as much as this film has done with about 2 extra days to boot. Let's just say it's not a good look for this movie, and it means certain death, essentially, for this obviously the chance of it ever being a franchise is pretty much all null. This movie came across as one of those things where Sony was like, you know what, we're so far into this, it didn't cost us a whole lot. Let's go ahead and just put it out there because maybe we'll make a quick buck on it. It's not worth us just, completely, shelving this movie and trying to get the tax, trying to write it off for taxes or anything like that. And so, might as well try it, but still not looking great for them either. So according to Tony over at Deadline, Paramount's Bob Marley, One Love is going to be so high this weekend, I see what you did there, Tony, with $51 million on a 6-day run, that the Ronaldo Marcus Green directed movie is going to post a 3-day of $27.7 million. That's higher than Paramount's own Rocket Man, which made $25.7, which happened during the pre-pandemic summer days of May to June 2019. A very interesting film to be comparing it to, but again, Tony is going to be doing what Tony typically does. And just looking at those numbers, though, as far as the internationals are concerned, right, that means the film has made around $74 million as of the opening weekend. This is, of course, also having those extra 2 days. This film opened up on Ash Wednesday, or as the world was celebrating Valentine's Day. Not even St. Valentine's Day, but just Valentine's Day. I digress. But this movie also cost quite a bit of money, too, and we'll talk more about that. And so that's why right now it's too hard to say whether this film will actually be able to make back its investments, to actually make back its money, because obviously it is doing well for this kind of film. over this holiday frame. From what I've heard about the movie, though, as far as the early reviews, especially the early reviews over on Critic List, one of the things that kind of has been noted is that the film doesn't really seem to be about anything. It's one of these biopics where it's just a meandering, lacking of any story. It's just random events in his life without an overarching thread. At least, again, that's according to people that have seen it so far. And I could see that that could be a harder sell for getting, maybe people that are a little bit more hesitant, a little bit more careful with their money back, unless you happen to be a big Bob Marley fan. I could see this also being a very big stoner hit, obviously, because Bob Marley, very well known for his use of marijuana, amongst other things. And so do not be surprised that this film ends up maybe doing better than even what I'm expecting because of that audience, which is not really a very well-known entity, I feel. Like what Pineapple Express is the other film that I can think of off the top of my head, where that audience might have actually been showing up a little bit in higher numbers, a higher percentage. I'm sure y'all can come up with examples too. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see where this film ends up falling up by the end of its run. Going over to the numbers.com, they're looking at the domestic numbers. As you can see, Bob Marley at $27.7 million. Now, this is, of course, talking here about the weekend estimates. And so this is just, again, for the Friday to Sunday numbers. And so that's why you're thinking, wait, weren't they just talking about 27 million in one case and 26 million in the other? And this is, again, just talking about the 3 days versus having the extra Wednesday and Thursday numbers coming in. So with that, Madam Web, a Sony superhero movie, lost. It had an extra 500 screens, and it lost to Bob Marley One Love. And again, I mentioned this a lot, but if you had asked a lot of people, most people, in fact, just a couple years ago, hey, could this ever happen? Most people would say, yeah, it may not do as well as some of the others, but I don't think it's going to do, as poorly as to lose to a biopic about Bob Marley. I'm just, again, not trying to throw Bob Marley under the bus there, but I think that if you just understand the history of where the Sony, even the Sony films have been, right? Obviously, Morbius is one of those examples of, okay, shadow of its former self, but you look to films like Venom, even just Venom 1 and Venom 2. Obviously, Venom 2 didn't do nearly as well, but it still was able to do well enough in this post-pandemic market where, again, that was the excuse for everything not doing well, and it was able to still perform. And so you look at this number here and you think, wow, the fact that this film is not even reaching the heights, and I say that very lightly, heights of Morbius, says a lot about where the current state of just the MCU is, where the current, and I know everyone's going to be saying it's not an MCU movie, obviously, but it's still very much MCU adjacent, right? This is still in conjunction with, I believe, Marvel Entertainment. And I know there's a distinction between Marvel Studios versus Marvel Entertainment, but still, Disney was involved in this process at least somewhat because there was a production company owned by Disney that had some involvement into it. Now, of course, this is not officially a part of MCU stuff or anything related to that, but still, we know that the Sonyverse has always had this very, close, intimate connection, and sometimes people have a very, difficult time kind of telling apart, especially with Spider-Man crossing over between the MCU and the Sony Spider-Verse films. And so I think that that is something that, again, we have to always keep into account, just to be honest with ourselves. And so Madam Web doing this poorly is, I think, a big sign that when it comes to the superhero genre, that obviously when bad movies come out, especially in this genre, it's just not going to be good, right? It's already a tough enough time because people, I do think, are to a certain degree burnt out, but I think more people are burnt out on bad storytelling, on perceived, forced agendas and stories. And I think that you look to the trailer for this movie, for instance, and you can really only see agenda being pushed because the basic premise of the entire film seems to be, okay, let's just get a female-centric cast and then just work from there. Okay, no, you have to have a much better core idea than just identity politics, right? Than just focusing on the gender of your actors involved, right? You have to have an actual story at the core of it and then build up around that. And then if you want to have certain ideas like that, obviously someone like me might be a little bit more critical of it, but at least you might actually have a chance of having a good story. What you do when you start doing things like this, though, when, again, the very premise of your film is just all about, female empowerment, that is not really going to be enough to make as far as a creative choice, that core element to build a actual film off of. So Madam Web coming in the number 2 spot here. And again, between the two so far, 45 million is being reported domestically for the Bob Marley film, 23 million being reported by the numbers.com. And again, I know that there are different, services out there that report different numbers. And so that's why Box Office Mojo might have certain numbers if they happen to be correct that day. And then you might have also different numbers across the board, like Deadline reporting, for instance. Argyle coming in the number 3 spot, finally being booted out of the number 1. Not dropping too bad. Obviously, it's a holiday week to a certain extent, and so it doesn't make me too surprised to see some of these numbers not dropping off as near as they could. Actually added another 42 screens, 24% drop there. Still not enough money, though. Again, the percentage might be looking okay, but because it made so little in its opening and because it cost especially Apple so much just to buy the rights to this movie, not even just to mention how much they probably added on to that with marketing costs, just a general typical marketing cost for a film like that, you are talking about just, again, still a massive, massive flop. Migration is definitely seeing a bit of an improvement, though, going up to the number 4 spot this time around, going up 28%. 9 weeks out this film has been. It's been out for 9 weeks. We're going all the way back to Christmas time that this film has been out, and it's now going up 28%, even though it's lost 229 screens. So that's just a very impressive feat for this film to be able to do, and I've talked about this before, that Migration is definitely one of these films that is doing much better down the stretch than anyone will have initially anticipated, but it's still not doing as well as some of the other Universal films. And for a non-franchise movie, I guess that's okay, but I know that this is the kind of movie where you would want to see a bit more return on investment, but so far it's actually doing well and is making money back. The Chosen Season 4, episodes 4 through 6, so this is now the continuation of the episodes 1 through 3, which were in the top 10 for quite a while after the first 2 weeks of its release, and so now we're seeing this continue to happen with Fathom Events again, putting out the next couple of episodes and next 3 episodes, and it's making $3.4 million there. So again, very impressive per theater ratio, right up there with Migration, right up there also even with doing better even than Argyle. So again, a film that's been out for 3 weeks, major studio, major money behind it, Apple behind it, right? And then The Chosen, again, Fathom Events obviously is very powerful, but not nearly as powerful as far as the marketing of some of these other companies. And so very impressive to see that film doing as well. Wonka, still hanging around. This film now out for 10 weeks. Also went up 11%. So this is that little engine that could movie that's definitely performing well above its weight. So it and Migration have seen somewhat of a similar path, but especially when you look at the overall totals, $209 million for Wonka versus the $114 of Migration. Wonka is definitely winning between the two, but still very impressive nonetheless. The Beekeeper dropping 4% there, and as I've mentioned this consistently throughout, right? Nothing against The Beekeeper because I haven't seen it yet, but all I can talk about is the numbers. And the numbers right now, especially since as I'm recording this video, there still is no actual confirmed budget. In fact, we'll go ahead and do this live just to make sure, because again, some people I don't think quite understand where we're coming from here. So let's see right now. IndieWire, Mean Girls, etc. This film, this was made January 14th. Now, so again, this is the reason why I kind of have a little bit of a doubt about this actual budget, because this has been reported from January, and yet this is the first that I've actually even heard that this film has actually come about. So I wonder if this was maybe, added on or not. It goes on to say here, with Jason Statham took a second with a little $17 million. Both are non-franchise films. The former, an update of the 2004 comedy, and cost $40 million or less. So, okay. Again, that's something where I think Wikipedia would actually be wise, an editor on Wikipedia would actually be wise to take that off, because this is saying in regards to, to both of them, right? And so I think that this is something that you need to kind of look into to say, wait a minute, it's not actually saying this is the reported budget, because again, there has not been an officially reported budget yet. But even that number, 40 million, is what I'm using, and the film is just not doing as well as it should be doing to make mass amounts of profits. Again, it's doing fine, but we really don't know exactly how well or not well it's doing until we actually know the budget for it. Anyone But You is also seen a little bit of a return as well. This film also punching above its weight. Lisa Frankenstein, second weekend, dropping 45%, but also dropping from the number 2 to number 9 spot, so definitely not looking good. And then a new film called The Land of Bad, no real knowledge of that film, is rounding off the top 10. Bob Marley, as I mentioned, $74 million. Madam Web at only $49 million. And so just to give you a bit of a comparison between these two movies, and so obviously you have the opening weekend numbers for Madam Web, and so right now it's only projected to make about, again, $15 to $20 million in its 3-day opening based on the numbers that we're seeing. And so, again, $15 million versus the 3-day opening of Morbius. Yeah, not looking good. Just to give you an idea as well, right? The first Friday, this means that for Madam Web at $12.5 million, it had Wednesday numbers, Thursday numbers, and Friday numbers individually, okay? So normally when a film comes out, right, when Morbius comes out at $17 million, that's the Friday plus Thursday premiere. Since Madam Web premiered on Wednesday, that means that everything it made up to that point was from Wednesday, Thursday, and then Friday individually made 4.3. So the fact that the film is already, again, 4 versus 17, 6.3 versus 13, 4 versus 8, it is, again, trending right now at about half the rate. First Sunday, by the end of the first Sunday, these are obviously when you adjust for inflation as well, $23 million domestic versus $39 million domestic. And obviously the numbers are still updating because there are some reports that Madame Web actually made $26 million, but still roughly half of what it made. Add on top of that, again, the international opening for Morbius was around $80 million. Right now, Madame Web is sitting at a worldwide opening of a lot less than that, right, of $49 million. So again, a little less than half of what was made by Morbius. And so if that trend continues, yeah, this film is not going to be able to even get to $100 million because this film made 162. If that halving continues on, half of 162 is not $100 million. It'd be very interesting to see, and I obviously really hope that happens, because to have a superhero movie make less than $100 million worldwide by the end of its run, nothing spells catastrophe quite like that. Argylle at $76 million, still also a massive flop. Migration continuing to add on to its profits, doing very well down the line, but still not the biggest of profits that we could see. The Chosen, again, doing pretty well. Wonka continuing to add to its profits, $604 million right now worldwide. I don't think anyone would have expected this film to be $600+ million. And I know that a lot of people have been talking about how the film had not yet had, I think, a full release in, was it the UK, or was I thinking about a different movie? No, it's been out in the UK for a while. So $77 million from the UK. Obviously, that is a huge portion of its money. It did get released in China, so I'm going to say, screw you to Warner Brothers for continuing to do dealings with the Communist Party there. But $7.1 million there, that's not going to be a huge take as far as the splits between domestic and international, because obviously with only 25% going back to the studios, if you release a movie in China, only having 7 million of your 395 million international is not as big of a deal. A little bit of a different story though when you talk about Beekeeper. So again, Beekeeper, $59 million domestic, $59 million international. So this is also a film where, again, not only is it the case that we have to wait for the actual budget to get released to have a better idea, but also the bulk of where it's, at least the largest portion of its international box office has come from China. And so remember, all the rest of the international is about 40% cut for the studios. From China, about 25% cut. And that's the reason why, if the budget is $40 million, it's going to be fine. It's going to do okay. It's going to make a little bit of profit. If it's anything more than $40 million, then the question mark starts to be thrown out. And so that's why I do think it's important that that number hopefully eventually gets officially confirmed. Anyone But You, $188.9 million. Again, the fact that this film getting anywhere in the area of $200 million is very impressive. Whereas like the Frankenstein is not looking great at all. Let's go to the charts, because we love charts here on OMB Reviews. Now that we have the first 2 weeks of Lisa Frankenstein, we can make some projections based off of historical standards. Check out my articles over at geeksandgamers.com if you want to find out more about how I box office and where I've gotten the methodology for making projections like this and accounting for inflation and other things like that. Great articles over at geeksandgamers.com. So we got Lisa Frankenstein at $7.6 million. That means right now I'm projecting the film to make somewhere between 10 and 15 million by the end of its run. Of course, a film could do a lot worse than this, could do a lot better than this, but historically, this is the most likely scenario. So making only the 10 to 15 million, the film costing only $13 million of a budget, that's still a far cry from the $33.5 million that it would actually need to break even. So because of that, right now, projecting losses around $13 to $10 million. So not the biggest financial losses in the world, but this is the kind of movie where it should be a slam dunk. You should be able to get enough of, again, this is a film that was going after the younger teenage, maybe young 20s female demographic that's just not showing up in droves to see it. It might be the predominant audience, but I've talked about this before. Just because you have a certain percentage of a certain audience does not mean that you can just forget about, okay, but how many people, right? If we talk about, okay, of the audience that showed up to this movie, 80% were of a certain demographic. Okay, but if only 5 people showed up total, that doesn't mean a whole lot, right? You still need to actually have a lot of people that also happen to be from a certain demographic to actually be able to use that as a proof of anything, right? This goes for almost any other film. And this is something that I know that I've had some debates with some people in the past, and I just don't see why that is, why that cannot be understood the way that it can. But I digress. Argylle right now, $254 million in the red for Apple at this point in time. So Argylle, still a massive flop. ISS, also still a flop. Nothing really happening there. Book of Clarence as well is now available on PVOD, I believe. Beekeeper, again, $11 million. When you look at the numbers, let me go ahead and see if this is actually updated, because I'm sure people will say, when your numbers aren't up to date, $119 million is what's being reported by thenumbers.com. So obviously there could still be some updates, but regardless of that, you're talking about if anything, the international numbers being delayed, and that means, again, less of a cut for the studios. And so, again, even on paper, you're looking at a film that's going to be a marginal success at that, if the budget is $40 million, which we still don't firmly know at this point. Mean Girls has made a little bit of profit, but really not all that much. Night Swim, Poor Things, try to think of anything else that's come out. Migration, as I mentioned, $44.8 million in profits. It's very impressive. Definitely not the numbers, though, that they would typically see from a film like Minions or anything like that. But those are the numbers currently as they stand. And let me see if anything else has been updated since last we talked. Iron Claw officially has now crossed also the profitability territory, so kudos to them. Glad to see that happen. It was Iron Claw, I think, that was the film people said, okay, wait for it to come out the UK. Maybe it'll start to see a little bit of interest there. I think that, let me go ahead and see if the film has finally gotten a UK release. Looks like it did get a UK release a little bit ago. It hasn't made a whole lot of money there, though. So obviously, in comparison to the other countries, it has made a lot, but would like to see that number go up quite a bit because it's a great film. If you've not seen Iron Claw yet, it's the best film, in my opinion, of the year, and it's well worth your time. But those are the numbers currently as they stand. What are y'all's thoughts? Do you think that Madam Web is going to turn things around in some way? Again, still looking to be, right now, it's $90 million in the red. Based off of the typical standards that you have, right? Usually films make about 3 times their opening weekend. So technically that would mean there's a possibility for Madam Web to be able to get to $150 million worldwide. But again, that's more of an average than the actual reality. That same rule would have to have applied also to a film like Morbius, and that would have meant the film would have made, $240 million based off of an $80 million international opening. And so I suspect this film will probably see very similar numbers to that film. Morbius, as far as, the similar drops percentage-wise, meaning pretty heavy drops, just not doing as well. Unlike Morbius, where there was this online meme factory that kept the film alive, I don't think that same thing's going to happen here with Madam Web, even though there have been some people claiming it's actually a hilariously bad movie. I just think it's a bad, boring, dull film in just every single way. But obviously, we'll be following the numbers here and talk about this more. If you want more information, though, check out my article over at geeksandgamers.com. Should be landing there later today in the evening or possibly tomorrow. I still need to actually write that and get that out there, but this video will be out before then. But let me know your thoughts about this and any other films I mentioned in the comment section down below. If you like this video, smash that like button, light up that fire button, also smash the rumble button as well. You guys are all amazing and beautiful people. Have a wonderful rest of your day, a blessed first Sunday of Lent, and as always, God bless. And now for a very special shout out to all of my February Chosen of Valhalla members, starting off with my Patreon supporters of Father Luca Illich, Rosetta Allen, check out her YouTube channel, Eagle Rider, and Miss Martin Muses, check out her YouTube channel by the same name. Also to my Subscribestar peeps, Matt317, check out his Twitch channel by the same name, Mr. Roy, and ZK-Man, check him out over at xtheboundaries.co. And if you want your name shouted out at the end of every live stream and video, go ahead and check out the top link in the video description below, where you can access things like podcast episodes that I do special for my members. I also do, of course, the verbal shoutouts, also the listed shoutouts, and a bunch of other things, including giveaways, access to a giveaways channel on my Discord, giving away Blu-rays and 4Ks. I've fallen behind a little bit, but I'm going to easily make that up for the month of February, so now is a great time to join to get access to that page. You guys are all amazing and beautiful people. Have a wonderful rest of your day. A blessed Lent, which starts in just a couple of days. And as always, God bless.